On July 8th, deep over the eastern sector of Ukraine, a Russian Su-35, one of Moscow's most capable air superiority fighters, took off on a hunting mission. Its job that day was simple and predatory: patrol the sky, wait for a Ukrainian aircraft to show itself, and kill it before it even knew it was being watched. This is a fighter jet carrying long-range R-37 missiles that can reach out and destroy a target from dozens of miles away, before the target's own radar has any chance to see the shot coming. In other words, Russia sent one of its best hunters into Ukrainian airspace to stalk its prey. What happened next has just been confirmed for the first time on the record by the most senior military officer in the United States, and it is a story that deserves far more attention than it's gotten, because it may quietly mark one of the most important turning points in this entire air war. I want you to sit with that opening for a second, because this is not a story I'm reconstructing from rumors or telegram gossip. On July 21st, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the single highest-ranking military officer in the United States Armed Forces, stood in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee and confirmed, in his own words, that a Ukrainian F-16 had achieved its first ever confirmed air-to-air kill against a Russian fighter jet. Not a drone, not a cruise missile, a fighter jet in a dogfight destroyed by an American-made aircraft flown by a Ukrainian pilot. This is the moment. This is the confirmation. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how it happened, why the tactics involved are genuinely remarkable, and why the timing of this confirmation, buried inside a much bigger and much darker conversation happening in that same Senate hearing, tells you something the headlines are completely missing. Let's go back to July 8th, because the sequence of events here reads like something out of a fighter pilot's training manual on deception. And once you understand it, you will never look at a routine Russian patrol flight the same way again. According to Ukrainian defense reporting that has since been corroborated by multiple independent sources, a Ukrainian MiG-29, an older Soviet-designed fighter that Ukraine has operated for decades, flew out and did something incredibly risky on purpose. It simulated an attack on a ground target. It made itself look, from a Russian radar operator's perspective, like a strike aircraft focused on hitting something on the ground, distracted, predictable, and vulnerable. This is bait. This is a pilot deliberately presenting themselves as an easy, tempting target to a Russian air patrol that Ukrainian command already knew was hunting in that sector, and the Su-35 took it. Drawn in by what looked like an unprotected ground attack run, the Russian fighter moved to engage, exactly the way a predator commits to a kill it thinks is already secured. But it wasn't alone up there. 2 Ukrainian F-16s, the same American-supplied fighters that arrived in Ukraine back in 2024 and have spent nearly 2 years primarily flying defensive missions, intercepting Russian cruise missiles and one-way attack drones, were positioned to exploit exactly this moment. As the Su-35 committed to what it believed was an easy kill on the decoy MiG-29, the 2 F-16s engaged. One of them fired and it connected. The Su-35S, one of the most capable fighters in Russia's entire air force, a jet worth tens of millions of dollars flown by a trained pilot, was blown out of the sky. Here's the detail that I think matters more than almost anything else in this story, and it's the kind of detail that gets buried under the bigger headline. Reporting on the engagement indicates the F-16 that scored the kill did so with the help of radar data fed to it from a Patriot missile battery on the ground, and fired an AIM-120C8, an advanced medium-range air-to-air missile, to finish the job. Think about what that actually represents. This was not one aircraft acting alone in a vacuum. This was a fully integrated kill chain, a decoy aircraft luring the target, ground-based radar systems feeding targeting data into the air picture, and a fighter jet executing the shot using information it didn't have to generate entirely on its own. That is not how air combat worked even 10 years ago for most air forces on Earth, let alone for a country fighting for its survival against a much larger neighbor. This is a networked, layered air defense system operating at a level of sophistication that should genuinely surprise you, and it's a level of sophistication Ukraine has built largely from scratch in the middle of an active war. Now, immediately after the shootdown, there was a strange period of confusion, and I want to walk you through it because it's actually revealing in its own right. Ukraine's Air Force announced the kill on July 8th itself, but in typically brief, almost boastful fashion, without identifying what weapon or aircraft had actually done the job. Their public statement at the time simply said, and I'm paraphrasing the tone here, that they had subtracted another Russian aircraft from the sky and that more was coming. On the Russian side, pro-war military bloggers on Telegram, channels that have increasingly criticized their own government's handling of this war, and have found themselves informally blacklisted from state media as a result, confirmed the loss of the aircraft almost immediately. But interestingly, those same Russian bloggers initially attributed the shootdown to a Patriot surface-to-air missile rather than to a Ukrainian fighter jet. Some analysts believe this framing may not have been an honest mistake, It may have been a deliberate choice to avoid giving Ukraine's F-16 fleet, and by extension, the American training and equipment behind it, credit for a kill against one of Russia's most advanced fighters. Whether that was intentional spin or simple confusion in the fog of war, we genuinely don't know for certain, and I want to be honest with you about that uncertainty rather than present it as confirmed fact. But it took nearly 2 weeks, and testimony from the highest-ranking general in the American military, in front of Congress, for the actual truth to be locked in publicly. It was the F-16. There is one more detail that deserves your attention here, because it tells you Russia's own pilots may have known something was different about this fight, even in the moment. Photos and video circulating from Russian sources around this period show Su-35 fighters departing on what's described as a combined combat air patrol and CD mission, that's suppression of enemy air defenses, carrying a specific weapons loadout, a KH-31PM anti-radiation missile designed to home in on radar emissions, alongside an R-37mm long-range air-to-air missile. That loadout tells you Russia was flying these aircraft prepared for 2 different threats simultaneously: ground-based air defense radar and airborne fighters, which suggests Russian commanders already understood their pilots were operating in genuinely contested airspace, not the kind of uncontested hunting ground Russian air power enjoyed in the earlier years of this war. Some analysts have pointed out that Ukrainian pilots have reportedly been using a combination of aggressive, evasive maneuvering and electronic jamming to break the lock of incoming Russian long-range missiles, buying themselves the seconds they need to survive an engagement and potentially turn it around. Whether that specific tactic played a role in this exact engagement isn't confirmed, but it reflects the broader reality of what this air war has actually become: a genuine, evolving cat-and-mouse contest in the sky, not the one-sided Russian dominance that a lot of early war coverage assumed would simply continue indefinitely. Let's talk about what this actually means for the broader war, because a single shoot-down, as dramatic as it is, only matters if it fits into a larger pattern, and this one absolutely does. According to Oryx, the open-source intelligence group that has spent years meticulously documenting and visually confirming aircraft losses on both sides of this war, using photographic and video evidence, 9 Su-35 fighters have now been destroyed since the war began. 9. That is not a rounding error for an air force that was supposed to enjoy overwhelming qualitative superiority over its opponent. The Su-35 is a twin-engine, 4.5-generation fighter, one of the most capable aircraft Russia's Air Force operates, and it has served as one of the backbone platforms for Russian air superiority missions throughout this entire conflict. Losing 9 of them, especially now with at least one confirmed loss specifically to a Ukrainian F-16 in a dogfight rather than to ground-based air defense, tells a story that a lot of mainstream coverage has been slow to catch up to. Russia has never actually achieved full air supremacy over Ukraine in this war, and as Ukrainian capability continues to mature, that gap is not closing in Russia's favor. It may genuinely be widening in Ukraine's. But I want to be careful here, because I promised you honesty over hype, and the honest picture is more complicated than a simple Ukraine is winning the air war narrative. Russia still fields significantly more combat aircraft than Ukraine does, by a wide margin. It retains extensive long-range surface-to-air missile coverage that continues to threaten Ukrainian aircraft, including in some cases over Ukrainian-held territory near the front lines, and even inside Russia's own borders when Ukrainian jets operate near contested zones. The single air-to-air kill, as historically significant as it is, being the very first confirmed dogfight victory for Ukraine's F-16 fleet nearly 2 years after those aircraft first arrived in the country, does not mean Ukrainian pilots can now safely dominate Russian airspace, or even fully secure their own skies. What it does mean is that the specific tactical playbook used here, a decoy aircraft, ground-based radar cueing, and a fighter positioned to exploit the moment of commitment, has now been proven to work against one of Russia's best available fighters, and that is a template that can be repeated, refined, and scaled if Ukraine has the aircraft and munitions to keep doing it. And that brings me to the part of this story that I think almost nobody covering the shoot-down itself is actually connecting properly, because General Kane did not bring up this engagement as a standalone piece of good news. He raised it specifically while being questioned about something much more concerning: a 3-year halt in American air defense funding. Read that carefully. The same hearing where the United States top general celebrated Ukraine's growing tactical sophistication in the air was also a hearing focused on why funding for air defense systems, the very Patriot batteries that reportedly helped cue this exact kill, has been stalled for 3 years. Kane's own words were that he wanted to highlight what he called the incredible work Ukraine's industrial base is doing as it scales its own capabilities. That phrase, scaling its own capabilities, is doing a lot of work because it suggests part of the reason Ukraine is pulling off increasingly sophisticated engagements like this one is precisely because it has had to build and adapt its own systems, its own tactics, its own integration between decoys, radar, and fighters, in an environment where it cannot simply count on an unlimited, uninterrupted pipeline of American hardware and funding to do the job for them. This hearing, by the way, wasn't a minor budget footnote. It was tied to discussion of a nearly $1 trillion supplemental budget request for the Department of War for the current fiscal year. $1 trillion? That is the financial backdrop against which this single F-16 kill was mentioned, almost as an aside, a genuinely historic tactical achievement getting a few sentences of attention inside a conversation about the largest defense spending figures being debated in Washington in recent memory. If you want to understand how genuinely complicated and expensive sustaining a war like this has become, both for the country fighting it directly and for the allies supplying it, that juxtaposition, a hard-won fighter kill mentioned almost in passing inside a $1 trillion budget hearing, tells you more than almost any single headline could. So let's bring this back to the actual moment that started this story, because I think it deserves to be reframed properly now that you have all the pieces. Russia sent one of its most capable fighters into the sky specifically to hunt. It was armed for exactly that purpose, carrying long-range missiles designed to kill from beyond visual range before a target even knows it's being targeted. And it was lured, deliberately, by a decoy that Ukrainian commanders sent up knowing the risk involved into a trap built from ground radar, air-to-air missiles, and two fighters that most people, including possibly some inside the Kremlin, still assumed weren't yet ready to win a fight like this. The hunter became the hunted, and it took nearly 2 weeks in testimony in front of the United States Senate for the world to get the full, confirmed picture of exactly what happened that day. I also want to leave you with the honest uncertainty that comes with a story like this, because responsible reporting on an active war means acknowledging what we don't know just as clearly as what we do. We don't know with certainty whether the electronic jamming and evasive maneuvering tactics reported more broadly among Ukrainian F-16 pilots were specifically used in this engagement, or whether this kill came down more simply to the decoy and ambush structure of the mission itself. We don't know for certain whether the Russian military bloggers who initially credited a Patriot missile for this kill were doing so out of genuine confusion in the fog of war, or a deliberate attempt to avoid crediting the F-16 publicly. And we don't know exactly how repeatable this specific tactic will be going forward, now that Russian pilots and commanders are aware, thanks to this very public confirmation, that at least one of their advanced fighters was lured into a trap using this exact playbook. Russia adapts. It always has in this war, sometimes slowly, sometimes brutally effectively, and the safe assumption going forward is that Russian air patrols in contested sectors will now fly with even more caution around apparent easy targets, which could make replicating this exact tactic considerably harder the next time Ukraine tries it. But here's what we do know, confirmed on the record by the top general in the United States military, in front of Congress, which is about as solid a source as this kind of story is ever going to get. A Ukrainian F-16 shot down a Russian Su-35 in air-to-air combat for the first time since these aircraft arrived in Ukraine nearly 2 years ago. It happened using a coordinated multi-layered tactic involving a decoy aircraft and ground-based radar cueing. It brings the confirmed Su-35 loss count in this war, according to independent open-source tracking, to 9 aircraft. And it was confirmed publicly at the exact moment the United States Congress is debating a nearly $1 trillion defense budget and grappling with a 3-year gap in its own air defense funding pipeline, a gap that directly touches the same Patriot systems that appear to have helped make this kill possible in the first place. This is not a story about one lucky shot in a chaotic sky. This is a story about a war that keeps quietly rewriting the assumptions almost everyone made about it in its early days, one engagement at a time, and about a fighter fleet that took nearly 2 years to notch its first confirmed dogfight win, but did so using a level of tactical integration that should genuinely impress anyone who understands how difficult it actually is to pull off a coordinated decoy and ambush operation in real combat, under real pressure, with real lives on the line in every cockpit involved, on both sides of that engagement. I'll be watching closely for whether this tactic gets repeated, whether Russia visibly adjusts its patrol behavior in response to this now being public knowledge, and whether Ukraine's air-to-air kill count against advanced Russian fighters starts to climb from here, or whether this remains an isolated, hard-won exception in a fight where Russia still holds a significant numerical advantage in the sky. Either way, you now know something that took a Senate hearing, independent Russian military bloggers, open-source aircraft tracking groups, and careful cross-referencing of Ukrainian defense reporting to fully piece together, and that is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to bring you before it gets buried under the next headline. Stay with me, because the sky over Ukraine is still very much a contested space, and the next chapter of this story is already being written right now.